Listen to me carefully. A lot of people think when somebody lets you walk away, it means they never cared. That's not always true. Sometimes people let you go because they believe you'll stay no matter what. Sometimes they think there will always be another chance. And sometimes they don't realize what they had until they don't have access to it anymore. Listen carefully, because this is something a lot of people learn too late. One of the biggest mistakes people make in relationships is believing that somebody who loves them will always stay no matter how little effort they give. They start treating presence like a guarantee instead of a gift. And the moment that happens, distance quietly begins. People rarely notice it at first. Everything seems normal. The messages still come. The calls still happen. The support is still there. The patience is still there. The person keeps showing up. And because they keep showing up, you start believing they always will. That's where the problem starts. When somebody becomes predictable, people sometimes stop appreciating them. Not because they're bad people, but because familiarity can create blindness. You stop noticing the things that once meant everything. You stop saying thank you. You stop asking how their day was. You stop paying attention. You stop making time. You begin expecting instead of valuing. And the person giving all that energy starts feeling something they never expected to feel while standing right next to you. Alone, see, nobody usually leaves because of one big moment. Most of the time, people leave because of small moments repeated too many times, feeling unheard, feeling unseen, feeling like effort isn't returned, feeling like they only matter when they're useful. At first, they speak up, they explain, they ask for change. But when nothing changes, something inside them changes. They stop asking, they stop repeating themselves, they stop fighting for attention. And that silence confuses people because silence looks calm on the outside. But often silence means decisions are being made. Then one day the person who always stayed leaves, and suddenly everything that felt ordinary becomes unforgettable. Now the good morning texts are gone. Now nobody checks in. Now the support you expected doesn't arrive. Now the space that once felt comfortable feels empty. That's when reflection starts. People begin remembering details they ignored, the effort, the consistency, the understanding, the loyalty. And they ask themselves a painful question: why didn't I appreciate this when I had it? Because value becomes obvious when access disappears. A lot of people think love survives automatically. It doesn't. Love grows where appreciation exists. Attention matters. Respect matters. Effort matters. Nobody wants to feel like furniture in someone else's life. People want to feel chosen. And when they stop feeling chosen, they slowly start choosing themselves. Now, here's the truth nobody likes hearing. By the time somebody leaves emotionally, they've often been leaving in their mind for a long time. The goodbye doesn't happen in one day. It happens through dozens of moments where they realize they were carrying more than they were receiving. So if somebody ever walks away, don't only ask why they left. Ask yourself what changed before they did. Did comfort replace effort? Did expectation replace gratitude? Did routine replace connection? Because relationships don't usually break from lack of love. They break from lack of attention. And sometimes the hardest lesson is realizing that the person you thought would never leave only wanted to feel valued before they finally decided to go. Let me tell you something people misunderstand all the time. Silence does not always mean somebody stopped caring. Silence does not always mean there are no feelings left. And silence definitely does not always mean the story is over. Sometimes silence becomes the place where truth finally gets loud. When emotions are comfortable, people talk easily. They text quickly, they call often, they fill space with words. But when emotions become complicated, when pride gets involved, when regret shows up, people often become quieter instead of louder. That's why silence confuses so many people. You think if somebody cared, they would reach out. You think if somebody missed you, they would say it. You think if somebody loved you, there would never be distance. But human emotions are not always that simple. Sometimes people go silent because they are trying to understand what they feel. Sometimes they go silent because they don't know how to fix what they broke. Sometimes they go silent because speaking would force them to face uncomfortable truths. And sometimes they go silent because they expected you to keep coming closer while they stayed still. Then suddenly you stop. You stop texting first. You stop chasing. You stop asking questions. You stop trying to carry the relationship by yourself. And that's when silence changes, because now there's room for reflection. Now they notice your absence. Now they realize nobody is creating connection for them. Now they sit with thoughts they avoided, and thoughts become powerful when there's nobody around to distract from them. That's why silence can reveal emotions that words never did. Because people can hide behind conversation, they can avoid honesty. They can delay decisions. But silence removes excuses. Silence asks difficult questions. Do I actually miss this person? Was I taking them for granted? Did I expect them to always stay? Do I miss the attention or the person? Those questions start appearing when noise disappears. And the strange thing is this. People often understand someone's value more clearly after distance, not because distance creates love, but because distance removes comfort. Comfort can hide appreciation. Comfort can make effort disappear. Comfort can make people assume there's always tomorrow until tomorrow becomes uncertainty. Now let me tell you something important. Your silence should never be punishment. It should not be manipulation. It should not be a game. Real silence is not about making someone panic. Real silence is giving space for truth to appear, because if somebody only notices your value when you disappear, that tells you something. If somebody never reaches out, that tells you something too. Silence doesn't only reveal their feelings, it reveals your reality. It shows effort. It shows priorities. It shows who reaches and who waits. It shows who chooses and who expects. And sometimes what hurts the most is discovering that the attention you were fighting for was never supposed to require a fight. But sometimes silence creates another kind of discovery. Someone finally understands. Someone realizes. Someone feels the absence. Someone sees clearly, not because you explained harder, not because you demanded more, but because for the first time your energy was gone. And when your energy disappears, people finally notice how much of the connection was being created by you all along. That's why silence can feel uncomfortable, because in silence, excuses fade and emotions finally speak. Listen to me for a second, because this part changes everything. People often believe they understand value while they still have unlimited access to it. They think they appreciate the person who checks in, supports them, listens to them, and stays consistent. But appreciation and access are not always the same thing. Sometimes people only realize the true value of someone after they no longer have automatic access to them. When somebody is always available, their presence can start feeling normal, not special, not rare, just expected. The message arrives every morning. The care keeps showing up, the effort stays consistent, and little by little, what once felt meaningful starts feeling ordinary, not because the person became less valuable, but because people naturally adapt to what they receive regularly. That's where reflection disappears, because reflection usually begins when something changes. And one of the strongest changes a person can experience is losing access. Now suddenly things feel different. The text doesn't come. The call doesn't happen. The attention disappears. The emotional support isn't automatic anymore. And for the first time, there's space to notice. People begin remembering details they ignored, not the dramatic moments, the small things, the way you remembered things they forgot, the way you listened, the way you encouraged them, the way your energy made difficult days feel lighter. Things they never stopped to recognize while you were there. See, when somebody knows they can return anytime, they rarely feel urgency. But when access changes, the mind starts asking questions. Did I take this for granted? Was I depending on this more than I realized? Why does everything feel different now? That's reflection. And reflection can be uncomfortable because it removes assumptions. People start noticing patterns. They remember ignored conversations, missed opportunities, moments where they chose pride over connection. Moments where they gave less effort because they assumed your effort would cover both sides. And suddenly memories don't feel casual anymore. They feel important. Now here's something most people don't understand. Reflection doesn't always happen because somebody lost love. Sometimes reflection happens because somebody lost certainty. They believed your presence was permanent. They believed there would always be another chance. They believed they had more time. Then reality interrupts those beliefs, because once somebody chooses themselves and stops waiting, everything changes. Now the person who stayed available becomes unavailable, and that shift creates awareness. You start noticing what somebody added to your life when you no longer receive it. That's why absence can feel powerful, not because absence is magic, but because absence removes distraction. You finally experience what life feels like without that person's contribution. And sometimes that experience is louder than any conversation. But here's the important part. Vibration should not become your goal. You should never remove yourself just to make somebody regret losing you. You should never build your life around being missed. Because people realizing your value is not the same thing as people being ready to value you. Reflection can create awareness. Reflection can create regret. Reflection can create understanding. But understanding alone doesn't change behavior. Effort changes behavior. Action changes behavior. Consistency changes behavior. So if somebody loses access to you and finally starts thinking deeply, that may teach them something. But your responsibility isn't to wait for their lesson. Your responsibility is to keep growing. Because the truth is this, sometimes people only reflect after they lose access. And sometimes by the time they finally understand your value, you've already learned yours. Listen carefully, because this is where a lot of people get confused. They think if somebody feels something strongly enough, they will automatically act on it. They think emotions always create action. They think missing someone means reaching out, caring means showing effort, and regret means fixing things immediately. But people are more complicated than that. Feelings and actions are not always moving at the same speed. And one of the biggest reasons for that is ego. Ego is strange because it doesn't always look arrogant. Sometimes ego looks quiet. Sometimes it looks distant. Sometimes it looks like waiting. Sometimes it looks like pretending not to care. Ego protects people from uncomfortable emotions. It protects pride. It protects identity. It protects the image people have of themselves. Because taking action often requires admitting something painful. I was wrong. I should have appreciated more. I lost something important. And for many people, saying those words feels harder than carrying regret. So what happens? They think about reaching out. Then they stop. They open the conversation. Then they close it. They type something, dumb it. Convince themselves it's unnecessary. Tell themselves enough time has passed. Tell themselves you probably moved on. Tell themselves silence is easier. Meanwhile, the feelings stay. That's the part people don't understand. Ego can delay action, but it cannot erase emotion. You can avoid sending a message. You can avoid making a call. You can avoid difficult conversations. But avoiding action doesn't stop thoughts. Thoughts continue. Memories continue. Questions continue. And the longer people avoid facing emotions, the louder those emotions often become. Now every memory starts carrying weight. Now ordinary moments become meaningful. Now they replay conversations. Now they remember opportunities they ignored. Not because they suddenly changed overnight, but because distance created space for emotions to become visible. See, when somebody has access to you, they can delay appreciation. But when they lose access, they lose distraction. Now there's time to think, and thinking can become uncomfortable, especially when somebody realizes the problem wasn't timing. It wasn't communication. It wasn't bad luck. Sometimes it was simply pride. Pride said, don't apologize. Pride said, wait for them. Pride said, stay silent. Pride said, protect yourself. And while pride felt safe in the moment, later it starts feeling expensive because ego wins arguments, but it loses connection. That's why people sometimes look calm while carrying emotional noise inside. You may think they forgot. You may think they moved on instantly. You may think silence means certainty. Meanwhile, they may be fighting thoughts they never speak out loud. But here's something important. Do not confuse delayed action with hidden commitment. Some people feel deeply and still do nothing. Some people miss you and still remain silent. Some people regret things and never change. Emotion alone does not build relationships. Action does. People reveal priorities through behavior, not imagination. So if somebody cannot move past their ego, eventually life moves anyway. Opportunities move, people grow, distant becomes normal, and then comes another difficult realization. Sometimes the person they expected to wait didn't. Sometimes they finally gather courage and discover your world continued. Your confidence returned, your peace returned, your life expanded. And now they face a truth they avoided. The person they thought would always be there learned how to live without needing them. That realization can hit harder than rejection because now they understand something painful. Their feelings never disappeared, but waiting for the perfect moment delayed the moment completely. And that's why ego is dangerous, not because it removes emotions, but because it convinces people they have more time than they actually do. Until one day they realize they still feel everything, but they no longer have the same access they once took for granted. Listen to me, because this is the part most people discover too late. When someone walks away or when a relationship changes, the first instinct for many people is to focus outward. They think about how to get attention back, how to make someone regret leaving, how to become impossible to ignore. But real change does not begin with trying to become more attractive to someone else. Real change begins when you stop building your life around being chosen. That's where personal growth starts. And the strange thing about growth is that at first nobody notices. It happens quietly. You begin making decisions differently. You stop waiting for messages. You stop measuring your value through someone's attention. You stop explaining yourself over and over. You start creating routines. You start protecting your energy. You begin doing things because they matter to you, not because they will make somebody come back. At first, it feels uncomfortable because when people have spent time seeking validation, choosing yourself can feel unfamiliar. You wonder if anyone notices. You wonder if distance means forgetting. You wonder if moving forward means giving up. But growth changes something important. It changes your relationship with approval. You stop needing constant reassurance to feel secure. You stop seeing silence as rejection. You stop treating somebody else's decision as proof of your worth. And that shift changes attraction. Because attraction is not only appearance, it's energy, it's confidence, it's emotional stability. It's the feeling that somebody values their own life. People are drawn toward people who are moving forward, not because they seem unavailable, not because they act cold, but because purpose creates presence. Now something interesting happens. The person who once expected your world to stay centered around them starts noticing changes. You respond differently. You seem lighter. You're not chasing. You're not trying to convince. You're not waiting for permission to enjoy life. And suddenly they see something they didn't notice before. Your value, not because you became a different person, but because you stopped shrinking yourself to maintain connection. That changes attraction because people often recognize strength after they stop expecting access. Now they wonder, what changed? Why do they seem different? Why do they feel more confident? But confidence isn't always becoming louder. Sometimes confidence is becoming calmer. It's choosing not to force outcomes. It's understanding that wanting connection and needing connection are different things. And when people sense that difference, the entire dynamic changes. Now let me tell you something important. Growth is not a performance. If you grow only to be noticed, you remain emotionally attached to the result. Real growth means becoming okay whether somebody notices or not, because your life becomes larger than the relationship. Your goals become bigger. Your peace becomes stronger. Your identity becomes clearer. That's attractive not because it creates jealousy, not because it creates competition, but because people naturally feel drawn to those who respect themselves. And here's the truth many people don't expect. Sometimes growth brings people back. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes somebody finally sees what they lost. Sometimes they remain exactly the same. But the beautiful part is this: your growth no longer depends on their response. You no longer pause your life waiting for understanding. You no longer need someone else to confirm your importance, because personal growth changes attraction in a powerful way. The person who once wanted to be chosen becomes the person who chooses, and that changes everything. Listen carefully, because this may be one of the hardest truths to accept. People do not always recognize value while they are experiencing it. Sometimes they only understand what someone meant to them after that person is no longer there in the same way. And before you misunderstand that, this is not about disappearing to play games. This is not about becoming distant to create attention. This is about understanding something human. People often notice impact more clearly when they experience life without it. When somebody is consistently present, their effort can become invisible, not because the effort stopped mattering, not because the person became less important, but because consistency creates comfort, and comfort can sometimes reduce awareness. You answer the calls, you show support, you remember details, you stay patient, you make time, you give understanding day after day, and eventually what once felt special starts feeling expected. That's the danger of being taken for granted. People stop seeing the effort because they only notice the result. They enjoy the support, but forget the person creating it. Then something changes. You stop overextending. You stop carrying the entire connection. You stop being available every second. And suddenly there is space. Space where your energy used to exist. Space where your attention used to live. Space where your presence once made difficult things easier. That space starts speaking. Now people notice, not because you became more valuable, but because your value became measurable. See, when something is constantly available, the mind rarely asks what life would feel like without it. But absence creates comparison. Now they experience ordinary moments differently. Conversations feel different. Days feel different. Life feels quieter. And questions begin. Why does everything feel off? Why do I miss this? Why does something feel missing? That's when people start replaying details, not dramatic moments, simple moments, the encouragement, the consistency, the emotional safety, the feeling of being understood. Things that look small while they existed suddenly feel significant. That's why absence can reveal importance. But listen to this carefully. Someone noticing your value after absence does not automatically mean they deserve access again. Awareness and change are not the same thing. Missing someone is not the same as respecting them. Thinking about someone is not the same as showing up differently. A lot of people confuse realization with transformation. They believe if somebody finally notices their worth, everything should go back to how it was. But reflection only matters when it changes behavior. Because if somebody ignored your value once, they need more than feelings to create something healthy. They need effort, consistency, accountability, growth. Otherwise, absence only becomes a temporary emotion. Now, here's something else people rarely talk about. Absence doesn't only reveal your value to them, it reveals your value to you, because while you're stepping back, you begin noticing things too. You notice how much energy you were giving. You notice what felt one-sided. You notice how often you were shrinking yourself to keep peace. You realize you were carrying more than connection. You were carrying responsibility for the entire relationship. And suddenly you begin understanding something important. Your presence had value. Your effort had value. Your care had value. Not because somebody finally missed it, but because it always mattered. That realization changes everything. Because now you stop asking people to prove your worth. You stop performing for attention. You stop begging to be understood. And if somebody finally realizes your value after your absence, you don't rush back just because they noticed. You look at who you became while you were gone. And sometimes you discover something unexpected. The greatest thing absence revealed was not what they lost. It was what you finally remembered about yourself.